Hey everybody, once again, welcome to the Think Orange podcast, where we want to encourage and equip leaders just like you who are investing in the faith and the future of this amazing next generation. I am your host, Trey McKnight, and in this season of the podcast, we're interviewing some of the speakers we're hosting at Orange Conference 2022, which is coming this April. That's right, it's on the way. Now we'll talk about what it means to be human and how our churches can better care for the humans in our communities. And we're so excited for you to get to hear this conversation with our interviewer, Dave Adamson, and our guest, Andy Gullahorn. Andy Gullahorn is a singer-songwriter originally from Austin, Texas. He moved to Nashville, Tennessee to attend Belmont University. And after years of playing guitar on the road with his wife and writing songs for various other artists, he started recording his own records again and returned to the road for solo shows. His eighth and most recent record, Everything As It Should Be, released in 2018. Andy was featured on CBS when they realized he went on a walk every day for 7 years just to high-five his friend. How amazing is that? It's an incredible story. You should definitely look it up or join us at Orange Conference to hear Andy in person. He's going to be with us. And we can't wait for you to hear this conversation right here, right now. So let's get into it.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining us here on the Think Orange podcast. It's so great to see you. How are things in Texas right now?
Actually, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh.
I tricked you by talking about Texas earlier.
But I'm actually going to start over. I think
things in Texas are excellent. I was actually there 2 days ago, and things in Texas are really great. But they are also great here in Nashville, Tennessee, where I live.
Well, thank you. I'm not even going to start over. Let's just leave that in the podcast. I think it just makes it a lot more real, right? We were talking beforehand. Yeah. We're actually talking. I want to get this straight. Let's get this taken care of right now. I was talking about that painting that's behind you. For the people who are listening to this podcast, I want to encourage you to go and watch on YouTube, because Andy's sitting in front of this huge painting. Like, that looks like it must be 5 feet, 6 feet wide, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And it's a picture of, I'm trying to explain this for our podcast listeners. It's a picture of a canyon with water at the bottom. Can you explain a little bit about that? Why have you got that there? Not on the floor, because I want to ask you why you haven't put it on the wall, but what is that and what does it depict?
It is a painting of part of the Frio River Canyon in Texas, in the hill country of Texas, at a place called Laity Lodge, which is Laity, Laity, not Lady Lodge. But it's one of my favorite retreat centers. One of my favorite places to be in the world. It's just beautiful. And this is, I think, a painting of a swimming hole kind of area that they have there in the canyon.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, that kind of leads us into what I want to talk to you about. As you know, the topic for our Orange Conference that's coming up very soon is Be Human. Is that a place where you feel like you connect back with your own humanity?
Oh, for sure. It definitely is. I think for a lot of people, like my friend Gina Hurry, who painted this, was there, and she came back, and I saw that and just absolutely loved it. But I think being out, and they just really honor the beauty of the place. And I think there's something about being there that makes me want to be more present with myself. Yeah. And I hope that's part of being human. Not escaping from my own humanity, but just kind of like sitting in it.
Yeah. Well, let's dive a little bit deeper onto that. Pardon the pun, because you're sitting in front of a water hole. What does it mean for you, Andy, to be human? What is that? What is, when I say that word, what does it mean to be human? What do you think of instantly?
Oh, I think a few things. One is to feel your feelings. I think another, I guess if I was a robot or a machine, I would be less likely to make mistakes. So to me, being human is screwing up. And that's part of it to me. I mean, those are the first two things that come to mind. Actually, feeling your feelings and making mistakes.
Wow, that's actually, of all the interviews that we've done, I like that answer. Nobody's really talked about the mistake part, which now makes me even more glad that I'm going to keep in the fact that I said how's Texas when you're in Tennessee?
Yeah, that
shows that I'm human, right?
Well, that's right. Yeah.
So when was the time, like, when did you start to realize that idea that making mistakes was human? Because let's be honest, we live in a world where social media wants us to curate everything and only put the best highlights of our life. But what you're talking about is real life, right? You're talking about the real side of humanity, which is making errors. First of all, how did you come to that conclusion, and how do you balance that, especially on social media?
Oh man, I came to that conclusion just by making a lot of mistakes and making a lot of, it's kind of like so many that I couldn't deny that I did it. It wasn't my game plan.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happened. And then, I think I've got 3 kids, they're all teenagers at this point. So they're 19, 17 and 14 years old. And watching them, I see in them the same fear of disappointing people or making mistakes.
Yeah.
And as a parent, I'm kind of like, no, you're supposed to do that. Like, you're supposed to have these questions. You're supposed to make mistakes. And so having kids, I think helped kind of have a little bit of grace for that idea that part of being human is making mistakes. Now, I don't know how that theologically all works out with Jesus being human and everything, but I'm a musician. I'm not a theologian. So I'll leave that to somebody else.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get comments and reviews about that side of things, but I 100% agree with you. And being a dad, I'm a dad to 3 girls who are 17, 18, and 21. And being a dad makes you realize how many mistakes you make, right? Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
and you just have to accept it and do your best and move on.
So Andy, how are you teaching your kids that that's okay? Like, is this something that you talk about? I know for me, I try to admit when I've done something wrong and make sure that I'm apologizing. That I'm trying to show by example, I guess. Is that something that you try to do with your kids as well, to pass on what it means to be human? And part of that is messing up?
For sure. That has been one of my goals as a parent. I do a lot of work. Music has taken me into some therapeutic realms. So I do a lot of work in like intensive therapy weekends and working with people through, childhood trauma, all this kind of stuff. And they're telling stories about growing up. And through hearing all of these stories, I just keep thinking, well, one thing I don't want my kids to be able to say is that my dad never apologized to me, or that my dad was always right, or always had to be right. My dad was always right in quotation marks. But so I think apologizing has been a big parenting game plan for me. And just so happens that I create lots of opportunities to use that game plan in my life.
Dude, that is honestly, that's really profound, I think. And I think there's a great parenting tip for everybody who's listening and or watching around that. So that's brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. How does your humanity, Andy, come out in your music?
Oh man, I hope it comes out in spades, honestly. I've talked about this before, but I remember hearing an NPR interview with another artist that I loved when he had a new record coming out, and Terry Gross was asking him, what should we be able to tell about you as a person from this record? And he said, I'm just a storyteller. I'm absent from the record. I don't think you can tell anything about me from the record. Wow. And I remember thinking, well, one, I don't really think that's true, because the stories that you choose to tell, even if they're not about yourself, they say something about the stories that you like to tell.
Yeah.
But my second thought was, that's the exact opposite of what I want to do with my music. I kind of want, if people are going to feel like if they listen to music or go to a concert or something, they're going to feel like they know me.
Yeah.
To some degree. And if that's the case, I want it to be as close to the real me as possible.
Yeah.
So I try to, it's not all just like all self-reflective stuff, but I'm not afraid of, I kind of think my humanity, like my specific humanity, like all of my experiences in life, all my successes and failures and my viewpoints on different things, like anybody can write a song, but I feel like it's my calling to like just bring whatever is unique about myself into into the world through that song. So I try to do that, and I do that by just trying to be honest and tell true stories about myself.
Yeah. Yeah, Andy, when I listen to your music, I think that's great. I certainly feel like I get a glimpse into at the very least, the way you think, right? The things that you're pondering.
Right.
But my assumption is that you're not doing it as a self-therapeutic thing. You're also trying to help the listener, your audience, to connect with their own humanity. Would that be fair?
I think that is fair, but I will say that the first order of business is me connecting with it myself.
Yeah,
I do think it is therapeutic for myself, and I want to try to write songs that are bringing healing to myself and moving me forward. But also the way that I experience healing and in life and connection is by hearing other people do that with their own lives and find that connection point. So my hope is that in kind of doing something that feels true to me and something that I feel like I need, maybe there's somebody else in the world that needs it too, and maybe they can connect to that. And if not, well, at least I met my first objective, which was just a purely selfish objective of writing something for myself.
You just tapped into something that reminded me of an interview we did on the podcast just recently with John Acuff, and he said sometimes the most human words that you can say to somebody else is "me too." Like you're experiencing this loneliness, this anxiety, this insomnia, whatever it might be, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual. But to be able to say to somebody, "Hey, I feel that as well. I'm in the same boat." That's probably one of the most human ways we can connect with another human. And I'm assuming that you would agree with that based on what you just said.
Totally. I think that's it. That saying that is a huge gift to anybody to, and that comes back to the parenting thing. Like what I want my kids to know is that whatever questions they have or failures they experience or suffering they have is just to say, yeah, that's not outside of the experience of somebody in the Christian life or in any life. I mean, that's just part of life, and it means that you're not crazy for feeling that way. And you're not the only one who's ever been there.
Yeah, that's really good. People will always follow your example more than they follow your opinion, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Closest thing we have to disciples, I think, Andy, is our kids, because they will constantly follow our example. Obviously, your faith plays a big role in the stuff that you do. How do you think the church, the capital C church, can be a little bit more human?
I think, just going off of what I said being human was, I think sometimes if the church becomes more like a corporation than a family, then you start worrying about making mistakes, right? In a family, you're going to make mistakes, and they have to be your family whether they want to or not. Like you can't resign from that duty. But like when you look at it more as like a corporation, where it's like, oh, if we do this, like, what are our shareholders going to think, or the program's going to be, whatever. I think and everybody's going to make mistakes. I think it's more about like owning up to it. So I kind of think the church in general, in some ways, maybe could just be better about being on the forefront of asking for forgiveness when we need to ask for forgiveness, and holding loosely what they think is like the best thing to do in a situation, right? So like, I don't know, just to, I don't know what that actually looks like for the Big C Church. I don't know that I've seen glimpses of it. But I think some of that is also thinking of it more like a family. Is like it gives churches a chance to maybe be a little bit more inefficient. Like when you think about a family, it's like it's not all about productivity and whatever. It's about being together and walking with each other through things. And I think, and there are a lot of churches that I think do that really well, that they're just more about the being with rather than making something happen. I don't know. That's the best answer to your question, but
no, I think you just said a couple of very profound things, especially what you started off with, essentially if the church is more community and less corporate, that's a huge thing that we could do in the world, right? And give people the opportunity, the freedom to A, ask questions, and B, maybe screw up from time to time and understand. So I think what you just shared was super profound. One of the things that I've been processing a lot lately, when it comes to Orange, I live in the digital space and helping churches with online ministry and social media. And if the pandemic taught me one thing, it's that the people in your community, that a church is being called to serve or that a church is trying to reach, they want more personal than they want production. And that's what I heard in your answer. Personal is maybe less efficient because highly produced things can reach more people, but personal is that provides way more engagement because it takes the conversation a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of the water hole back behind me, I was really lucky to be out there a couple of times with the late Eugene Peterson, who I loved his example of. I mean, he had big dreams for having being the pastor of a big, powerful church. And it just never seemed to happen. Like he was always kind of halfway disappointed with kind of the people who showed up. He's like, oh, I wanted to be more powerful and bigger and whatever. But then really moving to a point of like, if this program happens and 3 people show up, then that's great. That's what it needs to be. And then if it dies, then it dies. But it doesn't have to, I think twisting that back to being human, I mean, that's what life is generally like. There's not that much control over what's going on, but just to be present with what's in front of us.
Yeah,
and
so good.
He taught me a lot about that.
That's awesome. What a great experience. I would have loved to have had that experience. I'm a huge fan of Eugene Peterson. What a great experience. How important is creativity in this whole process? Tapping into your own humanity as a creative person. I imagine for you that's very significant.
It is. I generally say that I am. At the beginning, I said part of being human is feeling your feelings. I would say generally I am not very good at feeling my feelings, at least in real time. I usually feel them like sometime in the future, and I don't know what to pin them on. But I'm generally, for whatever reason, I've been cut off from my emotions. And I found that songwriting is the fastest way for me to connect with my heart and know kind of what I need in the moment and know how I'm feeling. So especially if I come up against something that's really hard to process, grief, suffering, whatever it is, I feel like entering into the kind of the river of creating something, which for me feels more passive. It's just kind of showing up and being willing. And then I feel like there's somehow in that process, it allows me to have some sort of bypass from all the stuff in my head and kind of dig down the heart. And then what comes out, it might take me a while of singing the song to understand why I'm singing it for myself. But that's what I think is, not just mystical, but I think entering into that creative process is kind of sharing that process with the one who made me. And I think that's it's kind of a language that I can understand a little bit better.
Yeah. Wow. That's so profound. What has it been like for you as a musician through the pandemic?
All of the above. It was definitely a different year. Last March, just having the whole calendar wiped out in front of me. But we started doing these online things called the Gullahorn Happy Hour on Facebook Live and Instagram Live. Yeah. And it wasn't a replacement for doing live shows, but it was a way to stay connected with community that I've met, all around the country and around the world. And, so it's kind of like it shakes out to finding, still finding that connection online. Yeah. And now things are kind of back to where I'm traveling a little bit, but I definitely I really miss being in front of people and seeing their reactions while I'm singing and being able to, I've always loved doing events where maybe it was more than just flying in for a night, going on stage and then leaving, where I could get to know people and get to hear stories and then kind of base whichever songs I'm playing that night on those stories. So I really miss that and have loved the chances that I've had to do it again. But I'm also, the trade-off was I was home for my oldest son's last semester of school before he went off to college. I mean, like, you know, I wouldn't trade that for the world. There were wonderful things about it too. And as a musician, I've been a musician for 20 something years, and there have been, nothing is ever certain in that industry. Yeah. And I think if I had 20 years of just trusting that, you know, somehow in the really lean years, somehow things were provided for. Yeah. If I hadn't had 20 years of that experience, I think I would have been really anxious about how am I going to pay our bills? Yeah. But I didn't feel it. It's not because we have money saved up. It was just like, you know, just when we needed it, there'd be like a check in the mailbox of somebody saying, hey, just want you to keep doing what you're doing. And after, you know, I just kind of trusted that we would be taken care of, and we were taken care of. But it's a chance to exercise that kind of faith. I hope I don't get that chance all the time, but, you know, I'm grateful every once in a while.
Yeah, fair enough. Hey, I feel like you've probably learned some things and during the pandemic that maybe you didn't want to learn, but I feel like you probably have, that would be helpful for a lot of our listeners and viewers who are church leaders and who are getting in front of both a live audience on a Sunday every week, but also in front of a camera to reach people who are online. What did you learn about the connection that you can have through a camera as opposed to, and how is that different to what you would get standing on stage in front of people?
I was surprised by the connection that was able to happen online. I mean, like, I love the connection that happens in person, and I don't think there's any replacement for that. Yeah. But in a time where there's no other options, and still when there may be some other options, but like there are other options now, but I still do my Gullahorn happy hours because the community that formed out of it was, it feels like family at this point, and it feels like we've been through a lot together. But one of the things in that virtual world, I mean, the online world, I started off just playing a bunch of songs, you know, and then I'm just really missing the connection. So one of the things I like about it's not Zoom, but Facebook Live and Instagram Live. What it does musically is it like really lowers the bar for excellence. Yeah. Right. So even sound wise, like if you're watching something on Zoom or whatever, you kind of expect there to be some connection issues, and then something happens and you miss something. So it kind of like, it really lowers the bar for perfection, which I never really met in the first place. But I think one thing that comes with that is like this informality. It's like, oh, we can just be, it gets rid of some of the pretenses. Yeah. It's just kind of bare bones. So I actually, when I started, it was, you know, I was playing a bunch of music. I was like, oh, this is boring. I mean, I want to interact with people too. So, and I also like games and stuff. So I started doing Facebook versus Instagram Family Feud. And we've done that every happy hour. And so like the games end up taking up half the time, but just interacting with people and like not being afraid of, it doesn't have to be scripted. That's kind of what I like about it. It's a little bit more informal. Yeah. Again, I think has that been your experience in working with this? I mean, I'm interested to know what you think.
Yeah, 1,000%, exactly the same thing. I think what I saw early on is I was helping churches to, you know, when March last year happened, first thing I did was start getting requests for people from church leaders for me to help them get their live stream happening, right? And what happened was they would start broadcasting what they were doing on Sunday, thinking that that's what people wanted because that's the only thing that they knew. But over time, the questions stopped being, how do I live stream my service? And they became, how do I do online ministry? And that's where the shift started to happen. And they stopped trying to a lot of churches stopped trying to replicate what they did on Sunday in the building and turned it into this is not what you're experiencing, and this is not what we're experiencing, so we're not going to pretend anymore. We're just going to get really personal, and that's the feedback that I've got. The churches that that have contacted me since, since things started to calm down just a little bit. I mean, they've gone up and then, it's that whole thing.
Right.
The ones who have said, hey, we're going to continue to do the online stuff are the ones that made that connection digitally and stopped producing, like being high production, and started to be more high personal.
Right. Well, that's a really good point that I connect with is at the beginning, this idea of, I think I set up all these mics and all this kind of stuff and was thinking this is going to be the greatest thing in the world. And then the truth is it wasn't that great. I mean, the audio, there are audio issues. And I figured that the best way for me to do what we were doing was just to use my phone and my wife's phone.
Yeah.
And at the same time, and the mics on there were fine, but really lowering the barriers for me to connect and have more content. I'd rather have it be simple and just a simple video or simple whatever than to try to, if I try to make it really fancy, then I'm not going to do it as much because it's more of a pain. Yeah. But if it's easy to do, I think people connected with the simplest versions of things. I totally agree. What they've put up with, the things they've put up with Zoom meetings for school and all this kind of stuff is like, really the bar for connection is so low. So that works to my advantage.
Yeah, totally. I think that creates a huge opportunity, right? Because the bar has been reduced during the pandemic of what we can put out online. You see a lot more personal things. So I think going forward, I'm wondering if you would agree with this. Going forward, the church, the capital C church, has a much greater opportunity to connect with more people now because we realize it doesn't require a huge budget to pull off something like this. Right.
And maybe some of that will translate back into the live services as well. Yeah. I think, to have the idea of being on like some kind of Zoom service where there's like, oh, sorry, there's some technical difficulties and people have to wait for 30 seconds until you figure something out. Yeah. I've been in a lot of churches where they're afraid of having 1 second of dead time between this prayer and this next thing. It's like, well, maybe that's being human too. It's like, maybe it takes you 10 seconds to walk up to the mic and maybe, that space in between isn't the worst thing in the entire world.
Yeah, I completely agree. Hey, I wanted to ask you a question that's more specific around this same topic. What churches have you seen that are doing online worship well, since that's in your space? Are there any churches that really stand out that you're like, hey, these guys are doing it really well, either from a technical point of view, like the sound quality, or maybe it's just from, hey, they aren't trying to create a Christian MTV video, like they literally changed the game to do more of the stuff that you're talking about with Happy Hour?
I don't know that I would be able to speak to that because the only kind of online thing I would watch is my own church, my own home church here. And it is like the opposite of that. We had one camera and my pastor, when they talked about my friend who does the videography stuff, he was like, oh, we got another camera so you don't have to like pan and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, no, if we are going any direction with technology, we're going down, not going up. So, it's a little Anglican church and that's kind of the way that we roll. So I would not say that we have the greatest thing. And I haven't seen, I don't know that I've really seen how other churches have been doing it.
Yeah, fair enough. Hey, Andy, what advice, if you could go back in time and speak to, 20-year-old Andy, what advice would you give him about the future? What advice would you give him about faith? What advice would you give him about the music industry based on all the things that you've experienced?
Well, first I tell him to invest in Apple stock.
And Zoom stock, let's be honest.
And Zoom stock, yeah. But wait a while, you can do it. It's the weird thing is I would want to say that, like when I picture the 20-something-year-old version of myself, and kind of the hopes and dreams that I had, most of those that didn't come true, but were replaced by ones that were like way beyond what I could have dreamed for. Yeah. I'd want to say like, oh, don't, part of me would want to like guide them towards the way that things ended up going, but like maybe things wouldn't go the way they went if I didn't have those things and I wasn't disappointed by them at some point. So that was part of the process, but I don't know. I think I know. I would say that more important than kind of business and networking and moving ahead and building whatever it is you're building, would be to just invest in my local community, my friends, and my church, because that's what's going to be there for me, whether business stuff is going well or not.
Yeah.
And luckily, I kind of stumbled into that. I kind of stumbled into, wasting time just goofing off with friends and spending time with church until I realized that I really needed it.
Yeah.
But that's what I find myself telling a lot of young artists who move to town. I'm like, well, it's important to work on your craft and work on your music. But the thing that has paid the most dividends in my life has been what I've invested in my local community.
Wow. That's really good, dude. Thank you for sharing that. That's really good. What I love is, I love that you took your time to answer that. And the perfectionist thing, the produce thing to do would be to edit out those pauses. I don't want to edit out those pauses because, again, it shows the humanness of you to really ponder through that question a little bit rather than just giving an off-the-cuff, shallow answer. You gave it some thought. I really like that.
Well, I'm trying to cut down the blank space because I'm not a quick thinker. So this is as quick as I can think.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Hey, Andy, for the people who want to get connected with you, how can they do that? What are you working on? What have you got coming out? And how can people access it?
It's easy, like on my name, Andy Gullahorn. There aren't other Andy Gullahorns out there in the world. So,
yes.
So on social media and Apple Music and Spotify and andygullahorn.com, all that kind of stuff. And one of the main ways that I've been writing a lot, but I haven't been recording through COVID time. I plan on doing a lot of recording stuff for this next year.
Yeah.
But one of the main ways that I've been interacting with people who are like really, interested in the music is through my Patreon, where I'm kind of like what I started doing. Another thing about engaging online, what you were talking about before.
Yeah.
Is I kind of always shied away from Patreon because I imagine, I'm going to have to record a song every 2 weeks and then mix it and then master it. And instead I just said, you know what? I'd rather, I'm just going to post a video of every song that I write right after I write it and talk about how I wrote it. So it's not going to be polished or anything, but it's like, if people want kind of to see that side of things. So like as I'm working through a song, sometimes I do multiple versions of a song as I'm working through it, but just to kind of be like, oh, well, I have this. I'm not going to wait until I have a polished version of it to let people hear it and kind of let it grow in that community.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that kind of COVID helped me with, is it let go of this thing of having that high production thing to give to Patreon people. It's like, I'd rather just share the raw version of it as it's happening. So that's a place where I'm where the new music is living at this point.
Wow, that's awesome. I really like that. Personal is more important than polished. I think that that's super profound. Being personal, I want to ask you a question before we end. I've been looking at your hat this whole way. I wanted to know what's on. Did you notice that we both? It's like we texted each other and got the memo for hats.
I should have worn
and
a black
t-shirts.
hat though. I know.
So what's on your hat?
This says Rice Festival,
Nice.
Fisher, Texas, I think is what it says. It's a folk festival in Texas that I played at years and years ago, and I just like the hat.
That's awesome. That's just a personal question from me, not for the podcast at all.
It's a good question.
Andy,
so what does your hat say?
Mine is a hat for the football team that I support here in Australia. I'm in Australia. I don't know if we talked about this. I'm in Australia right now, and this is the Western Bulldogs. They're my football team.
What time is it there?
It is 7:39 a.m. Hence, the YouTube viewers will notice that I'm taking a swig of coffee every now and again, just to try to, make sure I'm alert and into this conversation and
right
for the next question. Yeah, it's tomorrow. It's tomorrow morning here.
Man, I did go to Australia once and I loved it. It was a lot of fun.
Well, we have a lot of Orange churches a lot of churches in Australia that Orange partners with, and I know there's going to be a bunch that are coming to conference because that's what they do. We love to come over to Orange conference as well, and I'm going to be there. I hope to see you there as well. I'm sure it's going to be
for sure.
All right, Andy, thank you so much for joining us on the Think Orange podcast. Really appreciate your time, mate.
Thanks for having me. Good talking to you.
Well, that, my friends, is Dave Adamson and Andy Gullahorn on the podcast. Andy, thank you so much for joining us. Now, if you enjoyed listening to this conversation, we would love for you to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That's super helpful for us. We love this particular review by Dawn. Dawn said, I enjoy the variety of voices speaking the same philosophies. They're relevant to aspects and challenges that ministries are currently facing, and they bring insights to personal and vocational ministry that the daily tasks of ministry can benefit from. Well, we want to say thank you, Dawn, for your review. We'd love for you to leave us a review as well. Now, we cannot wait for you to join us at Orange Conference 2022. You got to be there so that you can join the conversation and we can continue learning what it means to be human together. If you'd like to join us, go to theorangeconference.com to save your seat for an Orange Conference like you've never seen it before. That's all this time. We will see you next time right here on the Think Orange podcast.